Hello, and welcome to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. I'm Ryan Purvis, your host, supported by our producer Heather Bicknell. In this series, you'll hear stories and opinions from experts in the field, stories from the front lines, the problems they face and how they solved them, the areas they focused on from technology, people and processes, to the approaches they took that will help you to get to the grips with the digital workspace inner workings. Welcome, Oliver, to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I'm Oliver Sulley. I run Edge Tech. We're a recruitment business focused within edge technologies, I guess. So anything emerging tech, whether that's artificial intelligence, automation, intelligent automation as a hybrid between them, and also moving, I guess, more into that generative AI side of things as well, which has really become popular over the past 6 months. That's our main focus. We work across the board from UK, Europe to US, Canada, and a little bit of Asia. And in terms of the types of areas that we work in, we work with the whole spectrum from developers, project managers, through to sales guys, marketing, and C-suite. So like to think that we have quite a nice broad overview and oversight of the industry as a whole at the moment.
That's great. Thanks for that. And you're right. I mean, I think AI has exploded. And someone was telling me yesterday that they think it's going to implode just as quickly because some of the stuff maybe looks better than it really is. I'm not an expert really, so I don't know if that's true. We'll see. Maybe do you want to tell us a bit about what the digital workspace means to you?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's one of those things that can mean a whole lot of things to different people, isn't it? I mean, we started the business in 2018, and I think if you look at the digital workspace from 2018 to now, it's shifted so dramatically with everything that happened with COVID and this sort of thing. From in terms of the actual physical workspace, the majority of roles that we work on now are hybrid or often fully remote. If you speak to someone now about being in the office 5 days a week, they'll gasp. They'll be surprised. They'll be, they'd talk to you as if you were talking about working practices from 40 years ago. Yeah. But if you said that to them 4 years ago, and you offered maybe 1 or 2 days a week from home, they'd be like, "Oh, they're fairly flexible." But it's the shift's been so big and so sudden because of necessity. So every company had to move to hybrid or remote, and people realised that it was possible. And a lot of time in tech roles and this sort of stuff, they're sort of like, well, why do I need to go back? What's the point? And I think there's a whole lot of things that can be said on both sides of that fence. And I know that I can sit on either, depending on the role and depending on who it is and this sort of stuff. But I think it's one of those things where it really depends on the company culture and this sort of thing. And then more to our side of automation, the work not being done necessarily by the humans, the work being done by bots or overseen by humans, but the majority of the actual boring labor stuff side of it being done by robots. And again, 5-6 years ago, it just wasn't a thing. So I think we're at a really exciting time. I think some people are seeing it as a scary time potentially for their jobs and this sort of thing. But I think that realistically, it's really exciting and gives us the opportunity to really focus on the stuff that the humans are good at, the stuff that the humans are there for. You don't want to sit there and be doing pointing and clicking and moving a mouse around to copy and paste something 5 times. You want to do that to actually be able to innovate and be able to change and use your creativity. And so I think if people look at it as that, it's all about the mindset and how you frame it.
No, I think you're 100% right. I think no one likes change, and especially if it's change that you don't really understand how it all works. Which one of the concerns I have with all this is that we're moving very quickly away from something that you could pull apart and look at, or dig into the code and look at and understand what's going on. Because of a lot of cases, black box, which is the tricky part. But you're right. I think we have to get away from doing the mundane. And I was at lunch yesterday, and we're talking about how ChatGPT has become part of our workflow, and what would happen if it was switched off now. Now you'd have to the thing that you were doing in 5 minutes because you got used to doing it with writing prompts, which would have taken you maybe a day or two. Now you're going to have to do that again in a day or two because you don't have this thing. So I think it's not going to be the toothpaste is out of the tube, can't put it back in. So I think we're on that path now.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think as you mentioned, sort of with it sort of exploding and imploding at the same time, I think it's people understanding that there are limitations to it, and the people who are hyping it up and this sort of stuff make it seem like it's unlimited at the moment, make it seem like there's anything that you can imagine it can do, which isn't necessarily true. And I think there are things that aren't helping it. I was on LinkedIn yesterday and I saw a video of someone playing a robot at table tennis, and I looked at it and I was like, that's fake. And if you scroll enough in the comments and stuff, you'd be like, oh, someone's just CGI'd a robot onto this and it looks like they're really comfortably playing table tennis. But if you look at the other 100 comments, all of them are like, oh my God, this is how it's going to be in the future, and this is how it is now, and if we're already here, how is it going to be in 5 years' time? And realistically, you just have to look at like Boston Dynamics and this sort of stuff to know that actual physical robots are nowhere near that, and they're still a long way off. And it's one of those things where I think Black Mirror, all of these sorts of TV shows that the majority of people watch, fantasizing it and making it think that it's a lot closer than it is, and we can stick in our little bubble in tech and be like, well, we know what it's good for, but 99% of people are there thinking, oh my God, if it can do this, how long is it going to be until it starts really thinking for itself and taking over and all of this sort of stuff? And I think you've still got to remember that it works for you, and it's only doing stuff that works for you. It's not going mad.
Yeah, it's not smart enough though. I mean, it's more efficient, more effective.
Yeah,
but it's not, it's only because it's got the processing power to follow the logical path that's been determined, but it's not thinking for itself. And I think for a lot of us, we kind of blur the movies with the stories with the real life, because that's how our brain works. Everything's visual, so it's very easy to join the dots from Terminator to ChatGPT.
Exactly.
But or even War of the Worlds kind of. And War of the Worlds, what was that movie back in the 80s, 90s? It's going to irritate me now. Anyway,
you're pushing me on age here.
The guy that hacked. Oh, you probably wouldn't even know. He hacks. This is like
War Games.
War Games. That's the one. Yeah. Where shall we play a game with this supposed AI? I don't think we're there yet. Although there was some drone footage of an AI supposedly flying a drone and shooting a human. But you see, you don't know if it's real or not.
And that's the problem with half of it. I think it's a lot of stories, a lot of, oh, I've seen this, but as well as the AI can do that stuff, it can also make that stuff up. And I think that's, as you know, there's all of the stuff going around at the moment in terms of fabricating things in generation. So I think that's more of it. I did however see someone tweeting saying that the future that I was looking for wasn't where I'm going to be doing all the manual labor and then the computers are going to be the ones writing the poetry and making the art, which is sort of the case at the moment. But yeah.
No, you're right. And so the thing that I was talking to someone about yesterday, which I think is along the same lines, is we still at that point where it still takes a lot of effort to get the value out of I don't call it narrow AI or very, very narrow AI. At some point, yes, it'll become the other way around. But like you said, the technology people know what's coming and they're working on it. But it's not, ChatGPT is probably the first one that's actually crossed the chasm to say this is something an end user can play with and use. And Copilot, which is coming through the Microsoft stack, can definitely see that adding value. I mean, we were talking yesterday about, how great it would be to just not have to go and create that PowerPoint deck, because you can just tell Copilot to go create the PowerPoint deck.
Feels like it's going to be like a next generation Clippy type thing that's actually useful.
Let's hope it's not Clippy, but let's hope it's actually useful. But even, if you think about code development, as much as people say, oh, it's aimed at developers, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think you're still going to it's going to be helpful to generate some code, but someone's going to have to make sure that code actually works and makes sense. And,
And I think it's one of those things. There was a stat that I saw a few years ago, and it was something along the lines of 80% of primary elementary school kids, when they have jobs, those jobs don't exist now. So when they start, how can you train them up for it? If you look at what looks like a viable career at the moment, and a viable job is a prompt engineer, someone who can write the prompts, who knows how to work ChatGPT, Bard, whatever it is, but knows how to work it really accurately so it comes out with the right thing every time. If I mentioned that to you 12 months ago, you'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's moving so quickly at the moment, but it's still a type of tech role. And it's a role that people within tech are going to move into another role within tech. So within that, it just means that there's no real way that you can understand what's going to happen. And we can all prophesize about it. We can all try and make our predictions, but whatever anyone says, they're still just shooting into the dark, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned prompt engineers as well, because we were talking about that as well yesterday. And I don't know what I was doing. I think I was doing something where I needed to generate a job description or something. And I found an example of a prompt engineer actually writing that with ChatGPT. And I actually hadn't even thought about some of the stuff that they put in there. Things like, so obviously you get the instruction, like pretend you're going to be X, Y, and Z to write this piece of text. Like we all know that one. But then there was things like, make sure this is no longer than 260 characters. If this is longer than 260 characters, rewrite the text. Make sure this is unbiased. Make sure this is unbiased from a racial point of view. Make sure this is generic. Like there was all these little things that I was like, huh. Now I understand what a prompt engineer would do.
Sure.
Now, I think that would be one of those roles that would probably quickly become a role and then quickly be absorbed into a skill set that you just have.
Yeah.
As one of those weird things, like it would exist for a period of time and then just be absorbed and be gone.
Sure. No, I get what you mean there. I think it's going to be super valuable for a period of time, but also it's going to be one of those things where people pretty quickly going to be like, well, I don't want to pay for someone to just do this. Like why am I doing that? It's going to be a real useful skill, but a business isn't going to want to pay people specifically just to do that, because they're going to add a certain amount of value, but they're basically just adding any value that ChatGPT can. They're not necessarily adding their own, and they have to get the other expertise from someone else. So whether it's that or whether it's just the AI becomes more advanced so you don't need them, I think it's one of those situations where it's going to be a flash in the pan, but it will be a real big flash.
Yeah, and as I said, I think it's a skill set, and I think maybe your typical business analyst or your system analyst would probably be doing that stuff, or your data analyst, because they would understand the context. Because that's, I think, the part that AI will never understand is what's the context question. Because you can build your own prompt. I mean, I was doing it with sort of Notion, where I had like a few columns in a row, and then I would just input the input, which would be my actual question, and then the prompts would just be me selecting options to build the prompt. So I don't think it's that far away from being automated.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's one of those situations. So we work really heavily within robotic process automation, which is, I guess, a lower level of that. So nothing to do with manual labor. I know people get confused with the term robotic, but automating invoices, automating anything that you can point and click at, it'll do that. And I remember I was speaking to a head of within it, and they were talking about their training academy. And one of the first things they train people on is how you define that process. And they did it by asking people, how would you make a cup of tea? And when they say, well, they'd like, I put water in a kettle, I boil the kettle, I'd put the water in the tea, and I put the tea bag in there. And then when it's done to my level, I'll take the tea bag out. If you need sugar or milk, we'll do that. And it's like, say, 7 steps. And then they pour out of a bag 45 steps. And they're like, this is how many steps are in that process of boiling the kettle. Do you check if the power's on? If the power's not on, what do you do? All of these sorts of things that you don't think of because it's just human nature. You're just like, well, I know all of those things already. And it's realizing that there's so many steps to everything that you really need to start from ground zero to work towards that. And it's exactly the same with this. It's working out what sort of things do I need to know, which I don't think I need to know because in my head they're obvious.
Yeah, no, you're right. And to be honest, my impression of RPA to some extent is it's just moving the mess from one place to another place. Because I mean, there's value in RPA. Don't get me wrong. To go and have a whole bunch of agents that are filling in stuff in the same manner that you can automate. Definitely agree with that. My background is more integration, so I would be like, why are you doing that? Why don't you just integrate it? Or if you've got 2 separate systems that do kind of the same thing, bring them together and have a golden source. But those things take time. So my sort of perception of RPA and the value has always been, you can train the RPA agent, whether using what's Access Anywhere, I think is the one, or one of those companies, to do that stuff in a shorter period of time than it would take to do the integrations. And some products didn't have APIs for a long time, especially if it's like a mainframe based product. And then while you get that running, you could then do the integration if it made sense or whatever it is. So I think there's sort of a horses for courses conversation there. But I think that failure logic that you mentioned, I think people don't think about that at all. I mean, I'm trying to get my house fairly smart at the moment, And I'm talking about like smart light switches and all that stuff. And one of the things that I have, which sounds very stupid, is I want when I turn off some certain plugs at night because they create a hum, and the hum irritates me when we're in the room. So every morning at 6:30 they turn back on again. And the first thing I want to have happen when that thing turns on, that plug, is that the ice machine must start. And I've been trying to find a little button to press the ice machine. And the problem I'm having is, for some reason, when we turn the switch on, that button doesn't switch on. And I cannot figure out what this little push button thing is. And I cannot figure out what that is. And I've talked to support. It registers on the Wi-Fi, but it's almost like it resets itself. Now, that would be where you'd want the sort of RPA bit of instruction set to go, okay, in this case, you need to do the reset to reload the instructions, so you know to press the button at 6:31.
Yeah.
I think it's just a buggy. I got the Monday morning built one, after the big hangover. But it's going to trying to do these simple things. You start realizing how, like, bad Wi-Fi, bad power, the human interaction where like my son knocked it off the button, so it didn't work. There's no way to know that. So, like, if I'm not downstairs, I wouldn't have known that. These silly things. But I think it's that whole process that we take for granted because we ignore the things that we do often because it's routine. It becomes unconscious competence, which is where I think AIs are great to call those things out as well, so they can almost deconstruct that stuff. So like if you go write a standard operating procedure and you ask ChatGPT to give it to you, it'll give you a lot of steps.
Yeah.
Because it's analyzed so much content that tells you all these steps. And you might go, okay, well, there's 29 steps here. We only need 15. But you probably wouldn't have come up with 15. You'd probably come up with 7 because that's what you were thinking about at the time. And then only after experimenting and iterating would you come up with the other 5 or 8 to get to 15.
Exactly. No, I agree with you. I mean, when you mention that RPA side of things, I was speaking to a guy last week, and he put it fairly clearly, which was, people are saying, "Oh, RPA is just a bandage," and this sort of thing. It's like, but if I've got a cut, I want a bandage.
Yeah.
I want a band-aid. I don't need a big old huge bandage around my arm. I just want like a little band-aid, just something that's going to fix it. I just need something that's going to sort it for the time being. It doesn't need to be a whole big thing, but it needs to be something. It needs to be something that can fix it in that in between. And as you say, that works. And then whether people move on, whether people use integration, whether people maybe use more of a whole intelligent automation IA solution, something that's got a bit more to it. So that's doing the process mining, the process analyzing, and then bringing it in board, maybe got some intelligent document processing, and then moves on to chatbots or anything like that. So you can interact with it. And I think it's the virtual assistant side of things, which is within business especially, that's useful, where it's like, oh, this is flagged up, this needs a human's attention a couple of times, and that's when it pings up to you, and you can look and you can be like, oh yeah, that is right, and you send it back to it. Or if you, even for like internal training, when you're messaging, like, how do I do this, and then it can bring all of these things up. I think those sorts of areas, they're not other people's jobs necessarily, they're just ways that make your life easier.
But you say they're not other people's jobs, but this is the irony, is that it becomes someone else's job, because every time someone else needs help, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with helping people, but every time someone else reaches out to get help from you for something that is simple, you're taking away someone else from the work they were doing, and there's actually a cost to that. I've got a formula for it. Now, when I started my first career, long time ago, we had a thing, Google it. Like, if you want to know how to do it, Google it. Don't come ask me, you Google it. I don't. And if you've Googled it, then you can't find out what to do. Then you come talk to me. And I get frustrated with people now, even today, and they come to me and they say, I don't know how to do this thing. And I literally say, well, have you figured it? Have you Googled it? Have you asked? No, I've done none of those things. Well, then don't come to me. Go away. Like, go and figure it out, because you need to try, otherwise you'll never learn. And I think this is the concern that I have, and I was talking about this yesterday as well, where you're going to go and have people generating code. They're going to go and build spreadsheets that are coming out from AI. They have no idea how it was put together, and they're just going to go, "Oh, it was generated. Here's the answer." You're like, no. Now that you've generated, you actually have to be double critical of it, because you don't know where it came from. So you have to ask questions of it so that you are comfortable with it, and then you also have to give it that last sort of sense check, because you're closer to it now, so you have to think. So I think there are risks to it, in the sense that people are going to forget quickly how deep their knowledge has to be of something before they pass it on to somebody else.
Yeah, and I think on that first thing, people in my office hate me because there's a website called Let Me Google That For You, and I'll type it in, and then I'll send them the link, and I'll be like, this answers it for you, and then they open it and it gets them every time. But yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's why, as you say, there still needs to be those technical skills and technical expertise overseeing it. I think the main concern isn't in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I think the main concern is in 30 years' time when those people aren't working anymore. When you sit down with your kids and this sort of stuff and you point at the save icon on Word, and they look at it and they're like, that's a save icon. I don't know what else that is. It's a similar sort of thing. They don't know what a floppy disk is. Like, these people won't know what life is like without ChatGPT, without any of these things that they can rely on. And then that's when you've got to hope that they've got some guidelines or safeguarding in place, because otherwise you're just going to get to a point where you've got the Prime Minister asking ChatGPT what to do with the budget. I mean, it probably couldn't be any worse. It probably wouldn't be a bad thing. But
well, one of the guys said yesterday he used ChatGPT to work out the amortization on his mortgage, which said, and he said it wasn't so much that it worked it out for him; it gave him the the VBA script to put into Excel to do it for him, and I would have done the same thing. But I would have still probably gone to the bank website or where I would normally have gone and put the numbers in, just check that they were kind of the same.
Yeah.
Because you need to have that validation, I think, at least now. I mean, I think we're a long way from the sort of Star Trek world where you say, computer, do this, and it does it, and you're like, that's 100% accurate,
Yeah, and I think it's always, the next advancement always seems so alien to us, but it also did 30 years ago.
Yeah.
When any advancement came around 20 years ago, when it was the first iPhone, you were like, well, it's only going to be a matter of time until like actual full augmented reality is a thing, and that's still not a thing. But you could have said that 20 years ago and people would be like, oh, it's only a few years off with like Google Lens and this sort of stuff, but nothing's ever really come of it because it still doesn't really work. And there's all of the concepts of it, and there are all these concepts 50 years ago, and they're like, oh, well, when was Back to the Future? 2008, 2013, something like that, the future one. But people are like, that's probably realistic, that's probably what's going to happen, and we're a lot closer to how we still were then than we are. And it's, the rate of change is going exponentially. I'm not saying it's not, but I still think people are expecting a lot more than it is for plenty of years to come.
Yeah, and that exponential change, what's interesting about that is for those that are in the stuff, it's going really quickly. For those that are not in it, I was talking about Mossel Bay, where like the retirement capital of South Africa. These are people that are still struggling with using an iPhone and WhatsApp. The concept of a ChatGPT, you can't even explain that to a lot of them. There's people that will understand, they'll follow, but there's a lot that don't. And when you look at some of these other things like using a CRM or doing online banking, they haven't got that stuff. Right. So now this concept of an AI potentially getting involved and going through your transactions and doing your investing for you and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think that's a fear factor that's a magnitude too much for a lot of people. So I think the adoption, that's what I think. I kind of agreed that there'll be a fizzle out at some point because it'll become a lot of people get used to it, like very much talking on Teams and Zoom. Everyone's gotten used to it now, and FaceTime and WhatsApp. And then there'll be this sudden like, oh my God, we've got this co-pilot thing. And then people get used to it, and then there'll be another thing, and it'll fall into the background. Like AR and VR has not materialized.
No.
It's been going, that's become technically viable for a long time, but it just hasn't materialized.
Yeah, and it works. There's niche areas I've seen it working in engineering and this sort of stuff where it can spot parts for you and help you build things and this sort of stuff where it's great.
Yeah.
But it's not day-to-day use, and it's not day-to-day use for the majority of people. I think you're right. I mean, I was in the bank yesterday, and there was a guy who was an elderly gentleman, and he was trying to get cash out, and they were like, oh, you could use the cash machine. He's like, oh no, I can't because my card doesn't have a PIN. Just refused to believe this card had a PIN. It was like, no, mine doesn't because I don't know it. And it's one of those things. It's like, well, I know every card has a PIN, but he doesn't. And it's just because he's never been taught it, he's never grown up with it. It's just happened so late in his life for him that he hasn't felt the need to take it. I guess the question is, with more and more people being digital natives, are people going to be able to pick this up a lot quicker in 20 years' time, when realistically the majority of the population are going to have been in a relative internet era, to the point that, especially in the workforce, most people in the workforce within 20 years are all going to have grown up with the internet. They're going to have grown up. I still remember what it was like when I was younger and Google wasn't a thing. And there was a text message service that you could text and you'd ask it questions and you pay like £2 a text and it would respond back to you, and this sort of thing. And that felt amazing at the time. And then Google came out that answered all of these things, and that was unbelievable. But for people really any younger than me, that's not a thing. They've always had Google. They've always had any answer to the sort of at their fingertips. And so does this feel just more like an extension of that to them, so that it's going to integrate fairly easily? I don't know. You'd probably have to ask them.
No, sure. I mean, I've got 2 young kids, and we see it with them. I mean, my daughter's 2.5, and she walks up to the TV and she presses the screen because that's what she expects. My son's 5, and I give him the TV remote to change the channels. Doesn't want to use the TV remote. He wants to ask Alexa to change the TV. That's their expectation. They don't have any reason not to think it's going to work that way. I mean, our car works with Alexa, so they want music, they shout from the back, Alexa, play this song. I don't even control the radio anymore. Oh, there we go. There's Alexa. Just hang on a second. Let me tell
Always
Alexa.
listening. Put on mute quickly. Don't want to hear Baby Shark playing.
Oh, no, please no. Yeah. And this is the thing that has always made me, and maybe this is when you get older, you look back at the younger generations and you think, they don't know like we used to know it. But I think people need to, I don't understand how a large language model works personally, right? So every Friday I spend 2 hours researching something. So my Friday this week will be on large language models, because and the way I figure these things out that they need to be done is I talk to a whole lot of people in a week, and if a concept comes up a few times, then that's what the research is about. So 3 people I've spoken to this week have mentioned building LLMs. So now I'm going to understand how LLM works. I mean, conceptually I understand how they work,
sure,
but I actually want to now understand, if you wanted to build one, how would you build one? Because it should be something now that I would dare say you could probably go to Azure and press a button and get a service that is your LLM already.
Yeah.
What it needs is data.
Yeah, I think there was obviously ChatGPT first started as open source, and then it got taken away from it. And I think one of those things is, I don't think it's necessarily hard to do, but I think it's just the cost of it. Obviously, the cost of all of the processing power and server space and all of this sort of stuff is just now so out of the hands and out of bounds for open source and the hobbyists and this sort of stuff, that it's just going to end up being a world of corporations trying to fight for each other. But it's odd, isn't it? Because everyone talks about ChatGPT now. ChatGPT is very much the noun for it.
Yes.
Like jacuzzi and hot tub type thing, like vacuum and Hoover. Like you just use the company name to cover all of it. But if you can name me one company that did the first one that is still around and the most successful in whatever technology, I'd be surprised. Because Friends Reunited, MySpace, those sorts of things. I mean, Nokia for iPhone, for phones, and even BlackBerry, these sorts of things. So all of the first movers in every single one are all now gone, pretty much. There's not really many that are still around, and it might be the one that defies the rule because it's so well known and because it's so. But you'd have said that about every single one, wouldn't you? I think for the first couple of years when they've come out.
Well, I mean, I think, to be fair, on the chat one, I think because it's up on my screen next to me, it's so ubiquitous. I don't even consider it bad, which is bad. No. That's on my list as well. But the thing is, because of their partnerships, I mean, the Microsoft, put 10 billion in, they're incorporated. So I think what will happen is the ChatGPT brand will be like Coke. It'll always be there.
Yeah.
But you'll just find it in everything.
Just be white labeled.
Yeah, you just don't know who. And I was talking to a friend yesterday. He's got a specific company that he runs, and they're doing a specific LLM. Their LLM might be unique for a while, and then it won't be unique anymore.
Yeah.
Because it'll be eaten by the others. But then I think also, in some respects, it'll be good to have different LLMs that are specialized and use less compute space and capacity, to the point that you can get it on a Raspberry Pi. The chips that are actually built, and that's the interesting thing for me is you sort of see how NVIDIA and what's the other one, TTM, I think it is, what their financial reports are talking about, the kind of chips they're building. That also are exponentially making the ability to process AI or deliver AI, narrow AI capabilities that much more efficient. That even the iPhones that are coming have already got some AI capability built into them. The sort of narrow stuff. The LLMs might go away in some respects because it's become a distributed LLM,
Yeah.
or I don't know how. Again, I don't know how it works. So I'm kind of guessing. I am guessing, or kind of. But that's the exciting thing about it. I think we'll see massive improvements, and then I think it'll lull down, and then we'll see another massive thing. And I think one of those things is going to be the deep fake thing. I think that's going to become so prevalent that it's going to be a huge problem. And then that's where you'll need AI fighting the AI sort of to authenticate and qualify and confirm that actually that was Joe Bloggs walking down the road with a machine gun.
And yeah, I agree with you. And I think one positive that could potentially come from it, if you can call it a positive, is maybe just people being a bit more skeptical about everything they read and everything they see, because people take everything just as truth. Even as I said, that video of that robot that was clearly CGI, everyone just sees it once and like, well, it's on video or it's on picture, so it must be true. So maybe at least, because you've been in tech long enough, I've been in tech long enough to know that Photoshop's existed for ages and all of these sorts of stuff. But if you, as you say, if you're showing this to the majority of people, something that's just a half decent Photoshop, no one's going to know. And so at least maybe the positive will be, it will just make people a bit more critical about things they see online, whether it's articles, whether it's videos, whether it's pictures. It'll mean that people will have to use a bit more skepticism and use their own critical thinking a bit more to actually work out if things are real. And maybe we can see that as a positive, I guess, that comes out of this.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I think it's kind of a wait and see in some respects to see what actually materializes. What are you finding in the market? I mean, are you seeing roles that are very AI specific, like a chief AI role or something like that?
I think people like to hire what they know.
Yeah.
So I think also if you put a hyped word in front of any job title, you're suddenly adding 20% onto the salary when it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen it over the past years with AI, with RPA, with chatbots, all of this sort of stuff. As soon as you put that word in, you're like, well, I want 20 grand more now. So people are trying to avoid it. Data science, we're seeing a lot of data science hiring, more and more data science hiring, machine learning. This sort of stuff, I think, is what people are sticking to. But you're seeing people on job descriptions being like, you need experience of ChatGPT, and it's like, what experience do you want me to have? It's been out for 6 months. It's been out since November last year was when 3.5 first came out for the public. It's been out for not even a year. You're asking me for experience with it. No company's got any guidelines about what's being used. So at the moment, everyone's just flying by the seat of their pants, doing whatever they want, completely unregulated. Yeah. So yeah, I can show you what I've done, but there's no framework around it. It's just been me toying around with it. And when people are like, they must have experience with it, it's like, but what part of it, especially if they're not necessarily doing the prompt side of things, they're just doing other stuff, but they want to integrate it with it. And I think people need to realize that while the technology is great and the technology is mainly new, the way you're interacting with it probably isn't that new. And the way that you're incorporating it into the business still has to be fairly safeguarded, still has to be fairly ring fenced in terms of how you're letting it access everything and what it's accessing and all of this sort of stuff. And then at that point, as you're saying, it's just an integration job.
Yeah. No, and a lot of these things, I mean, I always laugh when it's like you need experience in this thing. It's like, I want an entry level role, but you need to have 5 years experience in the role before you entry level. It doesn't make sense. I mean, I think what I'm hearing in the market is very much people are putting in policies, procedures to limit use of these tools. And they are prescribing that if you do use the tools, it has to be via the API, not through the sort of chat.openai.com, or unless you're on a premium contract, and you're definitely turning off the ability for ChatGPT to use your data to learn. So I think those are good things. And I've heard anecdotally of sort of AI roles being created and then not created, and then basically giving the responsibility to somebody else. Because of that inflationary aspect to it. And I don't think there's many people that could really say that are experts on AI because it's such a big, broad topic.
I'd be worried if someone said they were.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because, I mean, just being, for example, computer vision skilled is very different to, say, NLP skilled.
Yeah.
So, I think it's going to be interesting to see how the market plays out in some respects.
Yeah, I think it's almost a situation with a lot of these big companies of keeping up with the Joneses effect. They see that their competitors done something with AI. It's got a big spread in a newspaper. Their competitors doing something with OpenAI, or they've made a new partnership, and then they're like, well, their share price has gone up, so what can we do? And they're like, what do you want to do? I said, I don't care, as long as it's got AI in it. I don't care. We just need to do something with it. And then that's when you say these sorts of roles come out, and then the person sits there and like, what do you want me to do? And they're like, we don't really know.
Yeah,
that's why it fizzles.
Yeah, there's no value to it. There's no outcome-driven thing to it. And this is the thing. I mean, we were building a piece of functionality, and I actually asked the customer, "Would you be interested in this with like ChatGPT flavor to it, in the sense of, you're seeing in this information, we could repurpose it, make it more professional and all that kind of stuff." And he actually said, "Don't, because the minute you mention that thing, you'll be out. We won't be interested, because we don't want that thing, because we're not at that stage yet." So I think for those that don't have the regulatory requirements, you can go and use these tools. But those that do, it is a lot that has to be written before they'll even touch it. So you don't need to be cutting edge. You just need to be comfortable with it, I guess.
Just needs to work. You need to make something that works and is what they want. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Great. I mean, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything you want to share with anybody else to get in contact with you, that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, my contact details will be below. But if you're ever looking to find out more about the emerging tech space or anything like that, we've got a few events throughout the year that we always post about. Feel free to connect with myself, Ollie Sulley, on LinkedIn, or follow EdgeTech, and we'll keep you up to date with anything you need to know.
Super. It's great having you on here. It's been a great conversation.
Perfect. Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Heather Bicknell is our producer and editor. Thank you, Heather, for your hard work on this episode. Please subscribe to the series and rate us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. Follow us on Twitter @the DWW Podcast. The show notes and transcripts will be available on the website www.digitalworkspace.works. Please also visit our website www.digitalworkspace.works and subscribe to our newsletter. And lastly, if you found this episode useful, please share with your friends or colleagues.